where the moon lights.
An excellent day for an exorcism.
I'm your number one fan.
Hey up and welcome back to Rate Scary, the horror podcast where we talk about all things that are rate scary. And I am your host Zara, otherwise known as Scary Zara Mary. And I'm back again today with yet another bonus episode because I'm playing a little bit of catch up. But this is a film I'm so excited to talk about. I've already talked about it a whole bunch on my socials. So please do go check that out if you haven't already at Scary Zara Mary on TikTok and Instagram. But I wanted to get into some of the detail today around The Ugly Stepsister. So this is a film that has just released on Shudder. It debuted earlier this year at Sundance Festival, where reports came out of the festival that someone had actually thrown up in the aisles of the cinema. So we will get into, is The Ugly Stepsister really as disgusting as that report first stated? So first of all, like I always do, I'm going to take you through the story and then we'll get into some of the dirty, nitty-gritty details. So spoiler warning, if you haven't seen The Ugly Stepsister, and you absolutely should, it's available on Shudder now, please save this episode, come back later after you've seen it, and then we can talk all things Ugly Stepsister.
I've lost my mind.
So in The Ugly Stepsister, we have two sisters, Elvira and Alma, and their mother, Rebecca, has recently married an older man in the hopes of obtaining wealth and privilege. But in doing so, she is also becoming the stepmother of Agnes, the man's daughter from a previous marriage. However, on the wedding night, Agnes's father dies and the family learns that he was actually penniless. Worried that she might be a bit too old to find another new wealthy husband, Rebecca decides that she will marry off one of her daughters instead, and she selects Elvira as Alma has not yet reached puberty. While Elvira dreams of marrying the shallow but very beautiful Prince Julian, Rebecca is aware that her daughter is widely seen as conventionally ugly and has very little chance of winning him over, particularly if the very beautiful Agnes were to also compete for his attention. In order to make her daughter better, Rebecca suggests to Elvira a series of painful and primitive basic surgeries, which we will talk about, which include a rhinoplasty and also sewing on eyelashes onto her face, and also makes her swallow a tapeworm to lose weight. Elvira is also at finishing school taking lessons along with Agnes, and it's during this time that her initial admiration for Agnes turns to jealousy, as she feels that Agnes did not have to work for her looks or for her talent. And one night, Elvira discovers Agnes having sex with Isaac, a stableman. Rebecca discovers this thanks to Elvira telling her, and she forces Agnes to become a servant, as in the stepmother's eyes she is now a wench due to losing her virginity, and they start to call her Cinderella. Now, both girls have been invited to the prince's royal ball, and as this approaches, Elvira's tapeworm grows in size, causing her to become malnourished, and she learns that her hair is falling out in the bath when she instructs Agnes to brush her hair. And during a dress fitting with her mother, the dress seller gives Elvira a wig and a gown. But he also notices Agnes's beauty and makes inappropriate moves towards her. When she spits on him and on the floor in disgust, her stepmother instructs her to clean it up. And when they return, Elvira grows angry when she sees Agnes with a ball gown, which she then destroys. Meanwhile, poor Alma has gotten her period and has reached puberty overnight and has become absolutely terrified, having seen what Elvira is going through. We then learn that Agnes's father has not yet been buried, and instead he is rotting in a room, and she is crying over his dead body. And she has a vision of her biological mother coming to her in white to give her shoes, and instructs the worms and maggots to fix her dress, and warns her that the carriage will turn back to a pumpkin by midnight. So Agnes gets to go to the ball after all. During the ball, Elvira successfully attracts Prince Julian's attention. However, his attention is very quickly stolen by a beautiful, veiled woman. As the two dance, Elvira recognizes the woman as Agnes, and she escapes to another room, but vomits up tapeworm eggs. Later, both women return home. Elvira is absolutely distraught, And aware that Agnes accidentally left behind a slipper and that Prince Julian will use it to identify his dream woman, Elvira forces Agnes to hand over the other shoe. She tries to put it on her foot, but discovers that her feet are far too large for the slippers, and instead accepting her fate, decides that it's not over yet and cuts off her own toes. She's discovered by Rebecca and Alma, and Rebecca calmly sedates Elvira and completes the task because, unfortunately, Elvira didn't chop the toes off the correct foot. The next morning, a wounded Elvira hears the royal trumpets announcing the prince's arrival. She crawls on the floor, considering she now has no toes on either foot, and falls down a flight of stairs, breaking her nose and chipping her tooth, only to discover that Agnes and the prince have successfully found one another, making all of her efforts completely wasted. Defeated, Elvira takes the antidote for the tapeworm and vomits this up in a horrific scene. And the film ends with the sisters choosing to leave their mother so they can live a life free of her influence, while Rebecca is seducing another man that she met at the ball. And we then get a post-credit scene of the still rotting corpse of Agnes's father. So there we have it. There is the story of the Ugly Stepsister. It's definitely Cinderella, but not as you know it. Before we get into some of the more gruesome details, I do want to talk about the cast, none of which I recognize from anything else. This is a Norwegian film, if you weren't aware. So the cast have done various other productions, but certainly not anything that I recognize. In the lead role as Elvira, we have Leah Myron, who is a fantastic combination of being actually beautiful and not ugly, which is the whole point of the film, which again we'll come on to. Being completely charming and sweet and adorable and innocent and naive, while also being completely unhinged, especially in the later scenes. And I would love to see Leah Myron do more horror. She is so quirky and unusual, and I think I have just fallen in love with her. But then we also have Agnes, so our Cinderella, who is played by someone who has one of the most incredible names ever, Thea Sophia Loch Ness. She is very conventionally beautiful. She definitely fits into the Cinderella stereotype. And again, I thought she did a fantastic job. We don't see loads of her throughout the film, other than in moments where Elvira is clearly feeling very jealous of her and projecting an awful lot of hatred towards her. But I thought she was fantastic and captivating on screen. And then the other person that I want to mention, there are obviously more people in this cast, but these are our main three. Rebecca, played by Anne Daltorp. She is so menacing and completely fits into this stereotype of the horrible stepmother who will do absolutely anything to support Elvira and Alma, while also getting as much money as she possibly can, and clearly seducing every person possible, no doubt the doctor and the dressmaker and everyone else, in order to get to where she needs to be. And all of this comes from the mind of both writer and director Emily Blichtfeld. None of her work was recognizable to me. This was her feature debut. She previously worked on a lot of shorts. And The Ugly Stepsister was actually originally a short which only featured Rebecca and Elvira. It was 10 minutes long. It's from 2020. It's called Stesostra, which I believe means stepsister in Norwegian. And I want to live inside this woman's brain, because the themes that she has managed to portray in this film are totally my kind of bag. And she's talked at a number of film festivals about those themes. So one of them being an obsession with beauty and transformation, because we've got Elvira, who undergoes extreme and horrific measures, like gruesome cosmetic surgeries and this horrible diet of ingesting a tapeworm egg, just in order to conform to societal beauty standards and win the prince's affection. And these transformations, like having the thick eyelashes stitched into her eyelids and swallowing a tapeworm, highlight the destructive pursuit of idealized beauty. And I think that is just fantastic. I think it's something that certainly isn't talked about in horror enough. I know that we had The Substance from last year, and I see a lot of people making comparisons to The Substance, and thematically it is very similar. And The Substance was one of my favorite films. I think it was my top film from last year, so no wonder this film is ticking a lot of boxes for me, shall we say. I love as well the fact that we've got this subversion of the traditional fairy tale. Like, everyone really knows the story of Cinderella and her ugly stepsisters, and Blichfeld flips that classic narrative by portraying Elvira, the so-called ugly stepsister, as a sympathetic character. And she isn't ugly at all. Like, she's not monstrous, where in previous iterations of the ugly stepsister have been told. But we also have a very conventionally beautiful Agnes who embodies arrogance, and she embodies societal conformity. And this inversion challenges us to reconsider that perceived notion of virtue and villainy in similar and familiar stories. I think the film also does a fantastic job of critiquing the societal pressures that women face to meet these beauty standards, because Elvira's story reflects internalized self-loathing and desperation that I'm sure a lot of women and also some men can relate to from such expectations, and really emphasizes that psychological toll of conforming to oppressive norms. And it's also a fantastic critique of patriarchal structures, because Elvira's transformation is not solely for personal desire, but it's a response to societal and familial pressures, highlighting the limited agency afforded to women. Like, she is doing this because she wants to win the affections of the prince, and that's what her mother wants for her. It's what society expects of her. And I think doing this through a film, like using body horror as this metaphor, it viscerally represents pain and the sacrifice associated with the pursuit of beauty. And we have some fantastically graphic depictions that serve as that metaphor for real world physical and emotional suffering endured purely in the name of appearance and beauty standards. And I just fucking love this film. It's worth talking about those procedures, actually. First of all, we've got the nose job, the rhinoplasty. No anesthetic whatsoever. She's simply strapped into a chair, and Dr. Aesthetique just hammers away at her nose with a chisel and a hammer. And this is actually based on Indian rhinoplasties. Slightly different, but this is where a section of skin from the forehead would be cut away as a flap and then placed over the nose in order to create a new shape for the nose. And that's from the 18th century. So I love, like, all of these procedures are based on real world historical procedures. And I think that just makes it even more fantastic, because these aren't fantastical. Like, these haven't been made up. People genuinely either did this to themselves or had these procedures conducted on them in the name of beauty, which again just hammers home that message around beauty standards. The other one, which makes me flinch, and I've watched this film 3 times now, is the eyelashes. So a lot of people retell this story of, oh, fake eyelashes came from prostitutes in France and they were called cumbrellas. That's a myth. That is not true. But it is based on a Parisian procedure where this actually happened. Human hair would be sewn into the eyelids, and that was from the 19th century, so late 1800s, around about 1882. People actually did that before they realized that they could use glue, like I have done on my own eyelashes. These are not sewn in if you're watching on YouTube. Thank God. I could never go through that, and that scene just makes me squirm every single time I watch it. We've then got the tapeworm. So again, real procedure, and it was advertised heavily in the 19th century, predominantly to women in order to lose weight. People would ingest tapeworm cysts. The parasite would then absorb the nutrients from the body, and these women would lose weight. And I think the scene where Elvira vomits up the tapeworm is probably the most horrific scene in the entire film to me personally. One of my closest friends, Rose, has emetophobia, so I really hope that she's not listening to this. Basically, that means that she has a fear of vomit and people throwing up. She doesn't even like the word vomit or sick. Like, it triggers a response in her. And I think I've almost got a bit of that by proxy now from her, because we go to the cinema an awful lot, and every time we watch a film, I am also looking out for any triggers that might indicate that someone's going to throw up in the film, so that then I can sort of shield her from it and make sure she's okay. So when I see scenes like this now, I thought I was okay with these types of scenes, but it was just so realistic and so visceral. The way that Alma is pulling the tapeworm out of Elvira's throat is absolutely disgusting. And I think that story out of Sundance that someone threw up in the aisles of the cinema at its premiere, I would be highly surprised if this wasn't the scene that made them do that, because it made me feel queasy. So I can only imagine that's what it is. And then, of course, lastly, we have the foot chop. So Elvira decides to cut off her toes in order to fit into Agnes's shoe. And again, this is based on real life procedure, not necessarily chopping off toes, but it is based on Chinese foot binding, where the toes of the foot are bent underneath in order to fit in very, very tiny shoes. This is something that occurred from the 10th century in China through to the 20th century. It's absolutely brutal and horrific. But again, you can see where Emily Blichfeld has gotten the inspiration from for this film. So is The Ugly Stepsister really as disgusting as people say? I think it is. I think, how do I put this? I think we've been spoiled an awful lot as horror fans, as horror audiences, with films like Terrifier, which are just films that are gore for gore's sake at this point now. And I'm almost part dreading Terrifier 4 whilst also looking forward to it, because I think we just embrace the horrificness of it. And therefore, when films like this come out and people hear that, oh, it's disgusting and it's brutal, people immediately will make a direct comparison to films like Terrifier. And that's not where the brutality lies in this film. I think a lot of the brutality, similar to The Substance, comes from its themes and how you relate to those themes. And then second to that is these scenes of gore in some elements, how visceral they are, and how much Elvira is putting herself through. I think that is then layered on top. And I think that's something that Terrifier films don't necessarily have. Like, thematically, they don't have that element of grotesqueness. They just have the physicality of grotesqueness. And I think that's what people need to bear in mind with this film. And I think it's completely unfair that we compare, I say we, I'm referring to the horror community collective, that we compare films like this to films like Terrifier simply because people have said that it is disgusting. So that's my little mini rant. And I just think it's an utterly fantastic film. One of the things that I haven't mentioned, well, two things actually, that I think truly adds to the film and are such a contrast to the themes and how grotesque it is the cinematography. Because I love that this film feels and looks like a period piece, but it's not a definitive era. It feels like it's set in a fairy tale land, but there's then this contrast of almost brutalist architecture with some of the buildings. I love that contrast. The imagery feels very hazy and dreamlike in a lot of sequences. We have a lot of lingering shots, especially regarding the procedures. It does not pull away. And I like that some shots we are placed in the perspective of Elvira, her actual POV. So like when she's getting the eyelashes sewn in, we are looking directly up at Dr. Aesthetique. And I think this kind of hazy, dreamlike feeling, this fairy tale feeling to the film is helped an awful lot by the music. So, which is very similar, very ethereal, very dreamlike. I think it really helps with keeping the story moving along. And it almost has like an 80s synth feel to it in some parts, which again just adds to that kind of not confusion, but not defining the era that it's set in, which I love because it just makes the film timeless, which I think is just utterly fantastic. I genuinely cannot wait to rewatch The Ugly Stepsister. Like I said, I've watched it 3 times now. I watched it the first time thanks to Shudder. I got an early screener of it, which I am eternally grateful for. I then watched it a second time purely because I wanted to go back and look at some of the details with regards to the procedures. And then I put it on a third time as a comfort film. I was like, I just really fancy watching it again. And I think it's just going to be one of those films where I would gladly do that. And actually, if you are going to make comparisons to The Substance, I wouldn't class The Substance as a comfort film for me. I think it's one that I have to make an active decision to watch because it's quite lengthy, it's quite intense, it's quite stark and brutal. Whereas this film just feels lovely and cozy and sweet, considering how disgusting it is. So, yeah, maybe I'm an absolute freak, but I loved The Ugly Stepsister. And if you have also seen it, I would love to know your thoughts, like whether it ticked some boxes for you. Maybe it just didn't land for you and you prefer different types of body horror. Do drop a comment and let me know in this episode what you thought of The Ugly Stepsister. Or you can drop a comment on one of my posts on socials. So I am at Rate Scary on YouTube and Instagram, and at Scary Zara Mary on TikTok, Instagram, and Letterboxd. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you with you then. I'll see you soon.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
I'll be right back.
Game over. It's all for you.
Beware the moonlights.
An excellent day for an exorcism.
I'm your number 1 fan.